ever had a moment where there is this woman in the room and she goes ahead and says something very, very raw, something extremely bold, and so damn real that everyone just freezes and they think, oh my god, she said what? Hi everyone, I am Deeksha, a leadership coach, NLP practitioner, founder of The Power Pivot. Just someone who is very passionate, who's extremely invested in all things women and all things well-being. Well, for almost around 2 or decades now, I've been working with some incredible women, and most of them, I'd like to say and believe, have been very smart, very driven, very motivated, and they've crushed milestones. But you know what? We have all also carried the unspoken, the invisible weight. One of self-doubt, one of biases in broad daylight, one of that silent little burnout that happens behind the scenes, behind the promotions, behind the growth that we see. And most importantly, the pivots that nobody ever prepares us for. And that is why we are here today with a lot of renewed energy and hope, launching our new series called She Said What? Under Tails and Lattes. She Said What is going to be an unapologetic conversation forum where we're going to bring in and spotlight women from different walks of life, talking about their journeys, their struggles, their lived experiences, their wins, and their misses. So this is going to be an unfiltered chat over a cup of coffee, not a career talk in a blazer. And we're kicking this off with a very special guest today. While I'm going to spotlight her and invite her to come in and talk about herself, her journey, and discover more from her as we move along. So let's welcome to She Said What, Money Singhal. Money, thank you so much for being here, and we're so delighted to have you with us on the chat.
Thank you so much, Deeksha, for having me.
Why don't you come in and introduce yourself, talk to us a little bit about find your name, the story behind who you are, what's the life, what's the journey that you've lived so far.
You know, you asked the question in a very interesting manner, so maybe I'll go back to a story. I just get reminded asking my mom, why did you call me Money? And you know what she told me is that the name had to start with M or an N, maybe for some, let's say, astrological reasons. Second criteria was that it needs to be 4 letters, easy to write, whether you're writing it in English or Hindi. So that was her explanation. And like cut to that, I feel like today, just introducing myself, I've spent 20 years in consulting. And I actually think that, when I think about frameworks and structures, I'm like, okay, my name has been thought through in a very structured manner. I know it's funny, but the way you asked, like, what's the story behind your name, I thought I'll just share this with you.
Fantastic, and thank you for picking on that cue, because I did want to ask what's the story behind the name. So thank you for bringing that to fore.
Yeah. But apart from that, Deeksha, of course, it's a pleasure talking to you. You've known me for the longest. After we studied together, I've spent 20 years now in consulting. So it's one of those professions where a lot of the people that I still meet, not of course our cohort, but parents and grandparents, they still ask, okay, what do you actually do? So do you just give advice and that's where your work stops? So spent 20 years. I actually, in my current role, I co-lead the consumer and retail practice at a consulting firm called Alvarez and Marsal. Before that, I was at Boston Consulting Group. I was an MD and partner there, again in the consumer practice, part of the leadership team there. I also spent some time with Accenture Strategy. So as you can see, career consultant, one of the professions I didn't think I'll last that long, but I think the variety of it has kept me going. Also, just the interesting industries that consumer subsectors have, beauty and personal care, alcoholic beverages, food and beverage, more consumer health and nutrition. So all of the interesting things that I am otherwise also I would carry an interest. So I have focused on that.
Wow, so interesting. And yes, I think for the benefit of all, because we said this is going to be an unfiltered, raw conversation, I think Money and I have kind of known each other through common friends, through a lot of common circle, way back when we were in school. And we may not have been in touch, but it's just so good to reconnect and so good to see on how we've chosen our different paths and and we're striving to really excel in whatever we're doing. So kudos on that journey, Mani. I think what I'm really interested to know is also two things. One, the person behind the journey. So this is all about your professional facets, but what else brings color to your life? What are the other things that you enjoy along the way? What are the pursuits that you've been exploring all along? And second, you spoke about how you were named, but I think beside that as well, there is a lot that our childhood, our formative years leave as an influence, leave as a deep, deep influence on us and who we become in our adulthood. So I'd just like for you to maybe think about what are some of those early influences that you think shaped who you've become today.
No, you are absolutely right. Of course, while it's very difficult to measure and size what those influences will be. But there are those, unsaid influences that each one of us has through our childhood journey. That kind of includes the family that you're in. It includes, the school. It includes the friends that you've been with, which is what we say in some ways conditioning. It is very deep rooted. It's almost like at the nape of your neck, and you don't even, realize it is there. I think for me, and in the context of who I am, I think the ability to express myself and just say what I want to, I think that's a thread that I've always seen carry, and that is also that I never felt that I was repressed in any way. You should not say this. So there was the not word was very sparingly used. Right. So I think just the belief that you can have utmost potential or you can actually do anything that you want to. It was always there. Large part of it came from school, but I think the largest part of it came from my parents. Right? I mean, they used to say on dinner and lunch conversations that you can be the Prime Minister of India if you want to be. Right? So that, of course, it's almost like pushing the envelope to say that you can just be anybody. Right? So I think just the freedom to express yourself, open your thought process to anything, the ability to then just shape yourself. I think that's something I would hold that very close to my heart. I feel very lucky. I think while it seems something which is so obvious and each one of us should have that opportunity, but I think the reality is that not everybody has it, and hence I'm not saying that you can't ultimately digress from it, but it does take a lot of doing to undo your set beliefs which are so deep rooted, and then work on yourself and then try to eventually explore who you want to be.
Absolutely. And I think that's so very important, and like you rightly said, it looks like so fundamental, and it looks like yes, that's how it should be, but the unfortunate part is that the social conditioning with which a lot of women grow in this country and across various cultures is very, very different. And I don't necessarily want to make this a gender conversation, but for a lot of us, thinking beyond the box across genders is not a given, right? There are so many boundaries that we put in right from the childhood, and that's why I strongly believe our early year influences have a deep, deep impact on how we show up and who we show up as in the latter part of our lives. We'd love to know a little bit more about what are your personal pursuits, Mani? What do you really enjoy doing? Who's the person behind this consulting professional that the world sees and interacts with?
I think what I really like is travel. So that's something that I've always enjoyed. In fact, I remember that when I started working, the first paycheck that I got, I used that to book a ticket to travel somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's always been in my mind that I'd like to see more places. And when I thought that I started pretty early. And it's not so much anymore about seeing a specific site. It's just a way to cut off from the regular. I think it's about opening your visual senses, your audio senses, even the fragrances are different. So it's a completely different environment that you're soaking in. So I've come to really like that. So that's something I enjoy. And now it's not even about this is my bucket list. I actually don't have a bucket list. It's like you can just go any place and you'll find some nuggets that you will really enjoy. And whether it's food, whether it's the people, whether it's the mode of transport, whether it's just the color in which people are painting their houses, whether you're a monochromatic, kind of a culture or somewhere, where you're very vibrant. So I think all of those things I kind of notice, and it's just different from getting ready to work, coming back, doing your weekend stuff. So I love travel. And I think it's had a pretty big influence, on me to say a lot of things when you're traveling are unplanned, right? You say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then you're like, okay, oh, it's raining. I think I had a very fixed mindset in my life earlier. This is how I'm going to go about things. But then when you travel, almost always, even if it's a perfect plan, something will not work out. So, adapting to the hour of the day and still making the best out of it and not really being grumpy about, oh my god, my day is spoiled because there's this rainfall, or my flight was delayed. I think some of those things I've come to what I think, a little more open to just experiencing life.
Okay, interesting. Tell me something on a side note though, given your consulting career, does work travel also sound as exciting?
Not really. I think it's like it's a more structured part of my life. There's a funny thing because I kind of mentioned my mom earlier. I remember that when we were in school, there was some summer vacation and we were to fly to Goa, and that was the first time I was supposed to take a flight and it didn't happen. And I really complained to my parents that I couldn't really fly. So my mom really jokes about it that you're sitting at an airport every day. Do you remember what you said that you're not able to take your first flight? So
So
yeah.
much for that one flight missed.
Yeah.
Super interesting. So it has been, I'd say, a very personal and a very powerful share on your journey thus far, Mani. What I wanted to now explore with you as we go deeper is, over the years, I know you've been a career consultant and you've spent a large or all of your professional life working in the consulting industry, by way of which you would have met up, interacted with, had engagements with clients across the spectrum, across the board, across regions, across geographies, worked with so many leaders, with so many teams, etc. When you look back at the last 20 odd years, do you think leadership is any different for a man versus a woman?
I think the elements of leadership, Diksha, I would say, would be similar. But how the leader is perceived, or rather received, can be very different basis what has been a very traditional view of who a leader should be. So of course, there are elements of leadership which are about discipline, which you'd expect, whether it's a male leader or, a woman leader, you'd expect that them to exhibit that. But some of these softer aspects on, how you give feedback, how you express disagreement, how you then form consensus in the room. I think some of those work very differently. And I think it's a lot more about cumulative history, or let's say felt experiences of other people who would have seen, leaders in action or not in action, that kind of, creates that difference. It's not about the outcomes that you can get to. It's not about the time that you take to those outcomes. It's really just about whether there is a, expected way in which you will behave versus like a little deviation from how the whole process will work. That's what I would say. So I think, now, of course, times have changed, but, even in consulting, when I started 20 years ago, there were no women leaders, if I may. Like in the firm that I was working in, there were really no women partners. So I think one is that even women in the team who are experiencing leadership, at that time when I will say, okay, these are the check boxes. This is how a leader behaves, and either you will try to emulate it until and unless you have, a role model. Yeah. So I think sometimes just being authentic, just being who you are, is a little harder because in some way those stories have not played out, right? I mean, I don't even know if you said it's a raw and unfiltered chat, and it's it's not something that I should say, but there are times when I'll take a flight. I mean, this is an old story, a backstory, and everybody has their way of showing up for a meeting. Right. And okay, when you're like the flight is landing, I would just be like, oh, I have this thing about painting my nails. And then there'll be people sitting on left and like, what is this woman doing? Yeah. So I'm like, it's a part of my grooming for a meeting, but it just doesn't resonate with a lot of people. Okay, I'm doing exactly what you're doing, but in a different way. So I know it's not about leadership, but I'm saying men and women show up in a different way. The way they prep for something is very different. How other people perceive them, relate to them is very different. The degree of emotional discussion that you can take or not take can vary, right? So I think some of those are the differences, not so much in results, but
yeah. And I think I love that distinction between output versus input. So when we talk of the leadership differences, it's not so much about the outcomes or the end results, but it's about the journey towards those, which may be very, very distinct for anyone in that matter, not necessarily just a gender level nuance.
Yeah.
But tell me, Mani, as we go forward in this conversation, I want you to think about, if in this journey you've had a moment, you've had an instance, a situation where you knew it, you felt that you were possibly, someone who was the most qualified person on the subject that was being discussed in the room. And by qualified, I mean someone who knew the most on the subject, someone who was up there on their expertise on the subject. But despite that, you possibly felt unseen, you possibly felt unheard. If there was a moment like that, what did it really feel like for you? And how in that moment did you go about navigating that feeling? And does it still show up for you sometimes?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question because the feeling of not being visible, actually, it's never the language which is, let's say, not inclusive, right? So it's always inclusive language, but it's just the dynamics which are exclusive. Now, what do I mean by that? Like, you walk into a room and, you shake hands.
Yeah.
And I think you can sense from the way people shake hands with you whether they're even comfortable shaking hands with you or not. I find it really funny, and I've worked with such senior professionals even today. I think that comfort of meeting a woman leader, just having a solid handshake. It's just maybe they haven't done it before. Maybe that okay nature of it has to happen. So I think the biases, if you ever experience them, they're never really loud. It's never spoken. It's like who gets the eye contact, who gets the follow-up questions, whose jokes are landing in the room. Sometimes.
Yes.
So it's the very invisible stuff which makes you feel invisible. It's not the factual stuff, right? I mean, you speak, which means you have spoken and you have been visible. You're physically there, so you are visible. But do you still feel heard? There could be times when you actually don't. So it's some of these cues which you pick up. But Diksha, the thing is that it's also some of those things where sometimes that it's not intentional, but some of these things are so ingrained, and I think it's also your responsibility, I feel, that to try and make sure that you don't take it personally. If you're in the room, how do you kind of dissipate it, right? So I think the armor that you have is, of course, what comes to using facts, where it's not like a qualitative view that you're always carrying. But if you have facts, people almost always listen and respect that. I think the other thing is that the time when you feel like this, there's almost a reflex reaction to overdo it. Okay, I said something, but it wasn't received, so let me say more, or let me say it more loudly, or I don't think that really works. So there's a power of the silence as well. I think just the comfort and assurance and the trust in who you are and what you bring to the table needs to come in way before you are on the table. So the time that you have it, you're very comfortable in those silent pauses. You're comfortable if something didn't land and somebody else in the room is picking it up. So just practicing the ability of your presence to speak versus always your words to speak is also something important. But it does come with time. I wouldn't say that it comes on day one. I think, even in my early journey, I would say that there's always that feeling of doing it a little extra, and then and then there's a point in time in your career when you realize you don't need to do it, or you reflect on it, and then you're just comfortable in your own skin. In fact, I remember there was, I think, one meeting. I still remember it because I think that was my reflection point on something like this as well, where I was actually meeting, one of my clients, and it was a large group, and the meeting went well. I didn't feel any of the biases or anything. He called me up as a mentor, just immediately after the meeting, and he's like, "You don't have to do this 5% extra that you were doing. You just don't have to do it. You are good." I mean, it really touched my heart, and from that day, I said, "Look, you're not my client. You're somebody I treat as a self-appointed mentor in some way." But it was really nice of him to call and say, "You're very good, but that extra that you do, just you don't need to do it." So yeah.
I know, I totally hear you on that, Mani, and there are so many experiences, conversations that I've been having on this subject with women across industries. When I look back at my own experience as well, yes, I think you just nailed it with some of those pointers there. At times, it does not have to be said out loud, and at times that extra mile, that extra promise, that extra letting go of our boundaries, that extra slipping of, all right, I don't know how to negotiate, we'll agree with whatever is the commercial that lands best with us. That extra is something that maybe comes as a part of our conditioning, as a part of our early experiences, and a lot more that goes on. But that is a core differentiator on how we land in the room. And like we all know it, that when we talk of these things of women enablement and seat at the table and diversity, equity and inclusion, there are these glossy decks, there are these hashtags, commitments, everything, but it's actually about how it unfolds on the ground. How do we see these things in action? Because that's a totally different ball game. And I think the second thing that I loved about your share was something that I also very strongly believe in, that biases will not always shout out loud. It'll come with who's being interrupted, who's being invited to that real meeting that happens after the meeting, and who's getting that eye contact. And bias is not just about gender, it can be about age, accent, marital status, maternal status, how assertive is someone. We all carry biases, I do. I just feel it's that silent software that we've been programmed to live with all through our lives. And that is something that needs a whole lot of work from all of us, so that we're able to unbox these patterns and really normalize coexistence of different people, different perspectives alongside. So I think very, very well put there, and some strong takeaways from that share. As we move forward, Mani, you made an interesting point that early on in your consulting career, you did not have a lot of senior leaders who were women. So there wasn't a lot of diverse gender representation at the top. It does feel appropriate for me to then ask you that, do you think there are some professions, some careers that are still hardwired or coded male, and they're just dressed in a different language? I know we've made progress. I know consulting, finance, tech, there are industries that have made progress. But I often wonder, do you think there is this unwritten, unsaid rule book where most of the roles or some of these roles are built for a man's rhythm, a man's life, and not so much taking into account the transition points that come in a woman's life, be it motherhood, be it menopause, be it all things else?
Diksha, I'm not sure it's some professions which are like that. I think it's the collective understanding of an organization, to be able to make sure that some of these whatever pressure points or differences or different career stages or rather life stages are recognized. So I think, to say that there are some careers which are fit for women and which are not fit for women even today, I wouldn't say that, right? Because, if you see, women are in all professions today. The only difference is that, of course, the percentage could vary. That's the only thing, which is a function of when is it that organizations in that specific industry started realizing the business case for having women, right? It's not like it's not a favor to anybody that let's have women in the workforce. I think it's the point in time when the realization happens that we are better off, having a diverse workforce. So a lot of times in the past, I've been asked to lead initiatives linked to, let's say, diversity and inclusion. And, when you're taking a handover, or if somebody else did it in the past, you're like, okay, what's the business case? And sometimes I realize that the articulation of that is not very clear, right? The day that becomes clear, then it's like saying we need women because A, B, C, and then you're going to make it happen. So I think almost 10 days ago, I was having a conversation, with one of my clients, and, they are in a sector which requires a lot of focus on manufacturing, electronics, for example, and their own study, and it's not even a multinational organization, it's an Indian organization, and their study from the past shows that on the shop floor, women are more productive. They take less leaves. And this is not some report reading out to them. This is not like some preacher telling them that this is what, that's the realization. So there's a new plant which is coming up now in Hyderabad, and they want 80% of you know, women to be there. So it's a very, I mean, I'm saying I've given you one example in the whole value stream of the business where that realization is there. I think it's just where are you in your maturity curve, whether you've realized or not, right? So for I'll give you an example for consulting. When I started working, of course, there were no women. I would say very little. Actually, I should say no, because in my organization there were none.
Yeah.
So in the leadership roles. But then what happens is that when you start looking at the incoming talent and you go, recruiting, you realize that okay, maybe there was a time where there were only 10% women in that recruitment pool, but by way of education, by way of them wanting to, larger percentage of women doing undergraduation and post graduation, there are more women in the workforce. So are you going to reject like X percentage of your talent pool and really look at men? So automatically there is a reason to, have you, on board. And then of course, the journey starts from there. So when you realize that the diversity or having women is either neutral or positive, this is the reason. That's when organizations go and create a very clear path. So to me, it's not the professions, it's this profession or this organization has figured it out yet or not figured it out yet.
Interesting. And in fact, just the other day I was speaking to one of my clients in the FMCG space, and they were talking about how some of their plants are now 100% women. They're now wanting to replicate that because the business outcomes that have come to fore with that have been very, very positive and powerful.
Yeah.
So I think it's genuinely beyond coding roles or having a quota system on these roles are going to be for women. These are the kind of engagements that women could do, and we're kind of stereotyping and boxing it in that sense. But it's really about evolving our systems, evolving our processes and our mechanisms as an organization and at a systemic level, so that we're able to ensure that this diversity of perspective, not just men and women but across the spectrum, can be woven into the fabric of what an organization stands for and wants to deliver. Yeah, so I think that makes complete sense, and that is something that I'm also personally aligned with. But I often still hear this sentiment from a lot of women who I speak with who say that, but at work, the policies, the systems, everything else is still very, like, it's made for the men. Do you think, do you see that in any way? Have you experienced that in any way? Have you seen a change on that in any way through your experiences?
I think two things. I mean, one, as you were just speaking about, how a lot more work has to be done.
Yeah.
I think one of the examples that crossed my mind is that often, women who are leading the agenda of leadership, right? So for example, you're doing leadership hiring and you reach out to your talent pool. The way sometimes the conversation starts is that, hey, we're looking for a diversity candidate.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes it's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're talking to somebody, who's, been in the business for a while, and you are saying that you're leading the diversity initiative and you're looking for a diversity candidate. And the first impression that you want to give is that I'm interested in recruiting women versus, I'm looking out for talent and you stand out. So, I remember like, this happened. Somebody called me and on behalf of, obviously an organization, and I knew the person in that organization would probably be looking for that role. And I kind of, messaged them that, I just got this call and what is this? What's going on? Like, why would HR from your team do that? Yes. And, he just replied to me saying, hey, Mani, you haven't changed. I was like, yeah, and why should I?
Glad.
Like,
some of us haven't changed.
Yeah, he's like, take it easy. I was like, no, but this is something that you should know. This is not cool. I mean, anyway, I'm not joining you, but like, how can you reach out to me saying that, we're looking out for a diversity candidate?
Yeah.
But coming back to like the question that you raised on, are the policies made for men? Diksha, I'm not sure. The policies are made for the mix of employees that you have at that point in time. I mean, if you're coming from a, starting point where you have 100% men, then yes, the policies are made for them. So I think the question is that at what scale do you realize that, you need to make changes? Or you need to make addendums, or you need to have, other things that need to come in, which probably also take care of, the workforce, which is not just men, right? And it's not just women. It could be, any form of diversity in some way.
Absolutely.
So I think the question is that do organizations realize that when you have like just that one person joining in? Ideally, the answer should be yes, but it doesn't always happen like that, right? So I think there is a critical mass that builds up, and then that's when you say, okay, if this doesn't happen, we are going to face attrition. And, we are going to actually not going to face attrition. We have faced attrition. So in some way, I think one is the formation of that critical mass, and the second I've seen is that there has to be a reactive. I mean, there has to be an event which brings this reactive change or a view to having newer policies.
Yeah.
So I think I'd say like one needs to be a lot more proactive. I think that's something that I'd want to see, and also a little bit more forward looking to say what's the kind of mix that we are expecting, and then what's going to make how are we going to make sure that that mix is productive in its own right, so that the sum of parts is the global optima is much much higher.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just to cut some slack for the corporate world and for the ecosystem at large, there is a lot of progress that has been made. From where we started to where we are at today, there is surely a lot of progress. Can there be things that could be done above and beyond? Yes, absolutely. But I think the one thing that really sticks with me is for the longest time, maybe the response was completely reaction based, and the knock and nudge today is how can we be more proactive in preempting how the ecosystem is going to be changing with, forget just gender, with the generational diversity that we are with today. How can we just sit back, preempt and bake in those changes so that we are ready to be able to steer, anchor our talent imperatives in the right direction. So I think it makes for that larger canvas to be painted well, and that possibly is a cue for most organizations to look into. So much that we've spoken about money, that you have seen in your journey. What if you were to possibly give advice to, say, a 20-something woman who would be entering the world of consulting? What would that advice be? What is that unspoken rule or rules that you would tell her to watch out for?
I think one of my reflections would be that I think the assumption that merit is going to speak for itself, I think it's a fair assumption, but I think advocating yourself and your own narrative is important.
Yeah.
So just the view that merit gets rewarded, I think it's a very fair view because it does. But it's almost like hygiene, because in high performing organization that's a given. But the effort, or it's not even the effort, but I think the mindfulness or just the realization that you need to do a little more, talk about what capabilities you have, what you bring to the table to a larger set of people, I think is equally important, because I think it's a specifically consulting, it's a network. It's not a fixed set of team that you are in this organization and you're going to work with just this person. Most of the people who join in early, they'll work on a project for a few months or sometimes even for weeks, and then they move into another network and another network. So I think it's important for anybody, I think especially women, and I say that because I've seen a lot of them not doing it while they're brilliant. Just carry your story forward, put it on the table as to what you bring to the table. I think that's one. And the other is that, again, which goes back to how things have been in the past, how people have experienced leadership, etc., etc. But even with that, I think my advice would be, like, you don't have to shrink yourself to fit in, right? And maybe there are times like that. Then I think the question on the table is that, is it this specific group of people? Is it this whole organization? Or is it this kind of a profession? So I think that realization or that recognition of times, and I'm not talking about discomfort, right? I'm not talking about points that lead you to growth, because there are many times, in your work life where there's discomfort, but they are leading you to growth. But then there are other types of discomfort where you feel like I'm getting disconnected from who I am. I don't align with this. So understanding where that misalignment is coming from is very important. Sometimes it may not just be the organization. It just is like, okay, it was just a set of people you didn't align with. But then, there's 90% of, the rest where you can actually fit in. So I think not shrinking to fit in, to me, is important. Like, you don't have to change yourself because that's not sustainable. I think the only sustainable way to enjoy your work, in consulting, because otherwise, it's a hectic profession anyway.
Yes.
At least you have to be yourself. So I think that unapologetic, I think you've used that word a few times, like just being your unapologetic self,
Yeah.
and saying that there are some things which have carried me through
Yeah.
till here, and you can't let them go. So I think that's the other thing which I'd say.
Very interesting. And while you were sharing your narrative, I did resonate with everything that you said. And I was just thinking, if someone were to ask me, I think the one thing that I'd definitely spell out loud is going to be, please do not confuse being liked by everyone as being respected by all. And they're two very different things. And I think, early on in my career, I worked very hard to be that perfect team player who gets along with everyone, the fixer of problems, and, someone who never said no. You land something with me, and I'd just inevitably say yes for work, stretches, engagements, projects. I just wish this advice that you gave just now, do not, you don't have to shrink to fit in, was something that landed me back in the day. Because, while going through our career trajectories, there have been times when I may have smiled through microaggressions. And it's now, when I look back, it's really not about being difficult for wanting that clarity in life or setting those boundaries. It's just about owning yourself and self-advocacy, the other part that you spoke about. It's not just about doing the good work, but it's about talking about that good work. So I think, I wish we found some advice like that when we were starting out.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there's still a lot of work that we can do with the same advice. So I think that's some solid takeaway. You spoke about things not aligning with your way of being, etc. And that just got me to exploring this other facet with you, Mani. Having spent such a long time in the industry at large, have there been moments where you've hit that wall, where yes, there is success, yes, there are promotions, yes, there's a lot of good work coming in, but it feels like this is self-abandonment, this is not what resonates with me? Have you had moments like those?
I think so. And I'm just thinking about it. Like, I think, of course, in hindsight, you can kind of pinpoint, okay, this probably was the moment. But when it actually happens, it doesn't really come with an announcement. There's no special drama that happens around it. Or, this is the time when I'm hitting the wall. I think it just creeps in very quietly over a period of time. And it's also not about I'm tired or I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Right? It's really about I'm feeling disconnected with myself.
Yes.
Just small cues, for example, like if you go to the washroom and you're coming on your way back out, you don't check yourself out in the mirror. It's like, my mind is clouded with so many things, and I'm just in and out. Like, you don't have time to look at yourself. It could be different things for different people, but I think just that feeling of not being connected to yourself, I think that is the signal. I would say that that's when you feel that, I don't know what word to use, maybe it's burnout or something else. But it happens because you're always optimizing, Deeksha. You're like optimizing your time, you're optimizing your calendar, you're like, I want to check box 20 things on my to-do list. And sometimes you're the culprit yourself in some way, right? Like, you basically tell your office that, listen, I am going to be at the airport at this time, and I'm going to be hopefully done by security at this time. So when the security happens, this is the call that I can fit in then. And then you're like literally like running through security, and you're like, oh my God, my call, I need to get onto this. It's a very important discussion. And then you're like, you're emitting that stress in some way.
Yeah.
So I think the question sometimes is that, is it self-inflicted? I think the manner in which you kind of, organize things probably is. But I think the reality also is that, our lives get busier as we become more senior. There are multiple, sort of priorities. And the reflex reaction that I think you were also mentioning earlier is that always almost say yes. So you start defining yourself by, how stretched I am, versus maybe something that is more important. So I think for me, on that reflection, I've always said that there are times when now I think about those moments and I say, so can I do it? Can I live that kind of a day? Probably yes. No, probably yes. 100% yes. But do I want to live that kind of a day? No. right? So I think then, sometimes you do it because you want to prove to yourself, and I don't know, maybe to anybody else, but to yourself that, I can do it if anybody else can do it as well, right? So yeah,
True.
I can do it. I think that's a given. It's all tick, tick, tick,
Mm.
but I'm not sure I want to do it, right? So that's when you start sort of, reflecting, kind of retracting and saying, okay, what do I want to do? How am I going to solve this? And the
Yes.
shift almost always is internal, Diksha. I don't think it is
Mm.
external, right? I
Yeah.
think the belief that I can be excellent, but I can be human, right?
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think, and again, I've seen like, and it's very individual specific in the sense
Yeah.
I see a lot of, people, my colleagues, people in my team, who are comfortable, and specifically like the generational differences that we see, they're
Yeah.
comfortable saying that, hey, I can't talk at this time because for this 2 hours, I'm actually going to IKEA to buy crockery for my new house. I was like, this is too much information because I have not seen that happen in
Yes.
my, journey. But then
Yeah.
when I look at, it's just the comfort to say I'm doing something which is equally important and I'm not going to be available. And just a colleague, I'm also sharing what that's going to be, and that's okay. So I feel like I have learned a few tricks from the younger generation on how to kind of mix, like
Yeah.
blur the boundaries a bit and not be, very discreet about what you're doing
Yeah.
behind the scenes. So when you try to, hide, it's not so much hide, but try to have like very clean boundaries that,
Yeah.
this is me at work. So this
Yeah.
is like X, and this is me at home. This is Y.
Mm.
That's different. But I think the idea is that I am a human and I have 24 hours, and today something else takes precedence, and sorry, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I think just the belief that you can be an excellent professional, but you can be a human, doing humanly things, walking your dog, blah, blah, blah,
Absolutely.
doing, like taking your coffee break.
Absolutely.
So I think that's that you have to start believing.
Absolutely, and I think I couldn't agree more. It is something that really creeps in very silently. It definitely doesn't come in announcing itself. In fact, I remember 6 months back or thereabouts, I landed myself in one such phase where I was running programs, I was coaching, I was on some panels, trying to do it all. And one day I realized, oh my god, this is a lot of chaos. Is this something I can't do? No, I sure can. But it just all started looking like a checklist. So the passion from what I was doing started to dwindle, and that's not why I was here in the first place. So that sense of misalignment, that sense of disconnect, and I'd also say that sense of lack of control, it is slipping away. It's not something that I have in my control. It's just a feeling that one doesn't want to land themselves in. And I think a lot of work for that has to be done internally. So after this crash happened, there are things that I had to change, and that change was totally on me. Having my non negotiables, having no meeting days in a week, having my Sunday evenings totally tech free, whatever it was, because I realized that I don't have to sit back and earn my rest. I deserve it. I need to give myself that. And I think that's something that we all got to keep doing as we move along, because work is going to be demanding. Things are going to show up as these big packets that are going to hit us. But it's really about us coming in and finding that little space for ourselves.
Yeah.
On that note, Mani, I didn't realize how time just totally flew past. Before we end the segment and this episode for today, any last few nuggets, anything at all that you'd like to leave as a core message for the audience who'd be tuning in and watching this episode of She Said What? Anything that really comes to your mind as core takeaways?
About takeaways, Diksha, but like I said, I recently changed. I stepped into a new role.
Yeah.
So as I was doing that, I had some downtime. I had some time to just sit back, reflect, be in the mountains, or just do unconstrained thinking, like, which is not work thinking, but reflections in some way. I had the opportunity to just step back, reflect, just travel, which I like, be in greenery, mountains, and just think about who I am, what I care about. And I think I wouldn't even say that if we were having this conversation a few years ago, but I think now I can. I think the definition that you have for success, your own definition of success, is very important. And I am questioning and challenging that is this your definition of success, or is it a conditioned definition of success that you're inheriting from somewhere,
Yeah.
from people around you, your friends, your colleagues, your family. I think that distinction is important. So the recognition is important. Your definition could well be the same as anybody else's. That's okay. But I think
Yeah.
just the clarity that is this your definition in this point in time? So that's important. So there are times where you chase titles, which means you're chasing approval. You're chasing a lot of external definition of success, and it's not bad, because we all know the Maslow's need hierarchy, and you need to do some of that to then come to a point where you're not chasing something which is material, right? So that point comes in everybody's life career. For some it can happen on day one, for some it can come in much later. But I think that recognition that what am I doing and why am I doing it is important. So the metrics, I think at least for me, have started to shift. And I think it's important that everybody spends some time thinking about it. Like, one is, of course, when am I getting this title versus, how well am I sleeping every day? How proud do I feel showing up at work? How joyous am I, once I've finished something? So I think some of those things, are important, because that just tells you that you're making this choice. You could well be making the choice for that title. It's absolutely okay. But I think the feeling that I have no choice and I'm in it and I have to do it because that's the only path, I think that's not what it is. So it's a series of conscious choices. They could be, and there's no right or wrong about it.
Yeah.
So I just say that probably reflecting on something like this, which I'm sure everybody does, but maybe a lot more.
I'm not sure, but we'd like for everyone to surely do this, because I think that's very, very important. And just be more intentional about our choices, be it in our personal life, in our professional life, be it about the people we hang out with, the content that we consume, everything. Just being a little more mindful and intentional about it can make a world of difference to the quality of our life. And I think you rightly said, and this is a subject that I hold very close to my heart, Mani, which is how do we define success? A lot of times when I meet someone and you just ask them, hey, hi, meeting you after so long, so how have you been? And the first response that I get is that, hey, I'm with so and so organization doing this and that role. And it's like that's their identity. But what lies in you, what defines you beyond that role, is some bit of groundwork that I would surely invite all of us to do. So on that note, Mani, thank you so very much for being with us, for speaking your heart out. And I'm very positive that through our conversation here today, we will have a lot of gold for women, for people who'd be tuning in, and a lot of inspiration to come into their own way of being, to just assert their own presence and to live through their leadership journey unapologetically. Thank you again, and thanks to all who've tuned in to listen to us. So thank you, Mani, for being with us.
Diksha. No, it's been a pleasure, and what a great way to catch up with you after so many years.
I know, likewise. So much catching up to do, but thank you. We're invested in spotlighting women and their unique narratives, their stories as we move along. So yes, go grab your lattes, let's drop the mask, and let us lean into what real leadership sounds like and looks like. Follow us, share the link, talk about it, because you know what? These are the most real, true, honest conversations. Thank you so very much.